Hi, everybody. Welcome to College, the podcast. I'm Peg Keough, and today I'm joined by my special guest, my son, Brennan Keough. Today, we'll kick off with our usual In the News segment. I'll talk through the latest and greatest on what's going on with the bill that's in the Senate, the different pieces that they're debating at the moment. Then I'll be talking to Brennan about the good, the bad, the ugly of applying to college, how we handled the whole process of it as a family, and I'll just get his candid thoughts on the process and how it flowed for him from a high school perspective. Then we'll switch gears and talk about his experience when he arrived at college and started his college years. I think his insights as a recent college grad will be insightful and valuable for you and your kids. So stick around. We've got a lot to unpack, and you're going to want to hear it. Well, hello and welcome back, everybody. So I am not going solo today. I have a special guest, but I am going solo. My buddy Matt Karp is not here today, giving him a little break because I have a really fun guest to talk to who I will introduce in a second. But let's just, as usual, what I want to do is kick off and just do a little bit of in the news, if you will. There's always so much fun stuff for us to talk about in this space. So, as we've talked about, Matt and myself, the big beautiful bill is now in the hands of the Senate. So the House passed it by a slim margin. We've talked about what's in that bill. There's a lot in that bill, but we've talked about the education piece. So what we're seeing right now is that they are kind of falling in line with what the House had proposed as far as those direct federal student loans that the students can take out as long as they submit the FAFSA. There's the subsidized and the unsubsidized version, and the subsidized version might be on its way out, not this coming school year, 25-26, but possibly going forward after that. That's in the mix and not really being changed up. The Parent Plus loan will most likely change and be more, there'll be a cap on it, which isn't a bad thing. So they're kind of falling in line with the House on that, as well as the Grad Plus loans might be out. So on the loan front, not too many changes. Just real quick on the endowment tax that we've talked about, the Senate is tweaking what the House sent. Just as a reminder, it was like a tiered approach to the tax on the colleges, and it started at 1.4%, went to 7, 14, and 21. They're proposing something that's a little bit more abbreviated, a 1.4%, a 4%, and an 8%. So again, when this puppy gets passed and it gets signed by the president, we will do a deep dive into exactly what happened and how that can affect you, and we'll go through all that. But that's what's going on right now. The last thing you might have seen in the news, it's kind of very interesting to us, and we've talked about appeals, and after May 1st, and you remember this, Brennan, this is where you have to get your check in, and this is when your deposit check and make your decision. Well, some of these schools are doing some funky, nutty stuff post May 1st, which they can do now. But one of the schools to really bring up is Syracuse. And we've actually seen it with our families, but then there was a whole article. And we're going to talk about this next week and what this is all about. But Syracuse is actually going back to students that were admitted and are going elsewhere. Like they've made their decision and saying, hey, here's $20,000 more dollars. Here's $10,000 more dollars per year. So not a practice that we see very often from a school like Syracuse. And so we'll do a deep dive into that next week. It'll be fun to go into, Matt and I will kind of share what we're thinking about that, and just a little, never a dull moment in the world of financial aid. So that's for sure. So that's our in the news. So stay tuned. As always, we'll keep you posted. But I am super excited to introduce our special guest today. If you're watching, you can see we do have the same last name. So this is my son Brennan, and I know I've shared about both my kids, Shannon and Brennan, on podcasts and webinars. So I've been sharing, your information to the masses, Brett. But anyways, I have him here today. What we want to do is he's I'm gonna just share your age, but it's okay.
Yeah,
He's
that's fine.
31 years old, will be 32 years old this year. So
Mhm.
he's been out of school for a little while, but not eons ago like yours
Longer than
truly,
it
right?
feels like.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
yes. And so I'm super excited to have him on today just to kind of talk about like what his high school years and probably the later years, sophomore, junior, senior year. I'm prepping, building a list, applying to college, just talk through all of that. And then we'll shift gears and say, okay, now you're a big college kid. And he went to Indiana University. Woohoo, go Hoosiers. And then we'll talk about that. Like, how was that transition? And that's an interesting, some of our listeners, I'm sure you have kids that are thinking about going to public schools out of state. And we'll just talk about that because Brennan lived and we lived in Washington. As
yeah.
you guys know, I've now moved to Tucson, but at the time lived in Washington, and both my kids went to out of state schools, not private schools, but out of state publics. We'll
Mhm.
talk through that, and I think that just it'll be a fun conversation, and hopefully it'll be informative to our listeners. You can see a little bit of maybe your family in our conversation, and tweak what you do, learn from maybe stuff that we didn't do right or as well as we could have, and then things that we really hit it out of the park. So, welcome, Brennan.
Thank you. Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah. So, why don't you just take a minute, just introduce yourself, share a little bit about, what you've been
Yeah.
doing since you graduated?
Yeah, sure. So, so obviously grew up outside of Seattle, went to high school and middle school, and then went to Indiana University, studied business at the Kelley School of Business for 4 years, which is great. I loved going to Indiana, would highly recommend, and I'm sure we'll get more into the weeds. But I graduated in 2016. While I was in college, my major was technically supply chain management, and I had an internship my junior year at Boeing doing supply chain related work. But while I was in college, I very much had kind of the entrepreneurial bug, even since I was little. So all of my time outside of class and spending time with friends socially was doing things within the local startup community or kind of the entrepreneurial world. So I graduated, got a job at Boeing in a rotational program where I got to try out a different job every 4 months for 2 years. And after that, I got a job in corporate strategy. So I stayed at Boeing for 3 years after graduation. But the whole time in college and after, I knew I wanted to start a business. It was just a question of how, what, and when. And so after 3 years at Boeing, I took the jump and started a venture-backed company called Mystery in, let's see, like early 2019. There's a whole story around that company, but we raised a fair amount of money, about $25 million, built the team to almost 100 people, and sold that business about 2 years ago now. Since then, I started my second company that's called Wildcard. We're a bootstrapped company and we're based in Los Angeles. So very much, the entrepreneurial itch, and it's the thing I love to do. And yeah, that's been my life post college professionally.
You even did that business with karate videos even in high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even in high school, like I mean, the big thing I spent my high school doing was teaching and competing in various forms of martial arts. Loved teaching. And when I left from Seattle to go to school in Indiana, I had a bunch of students that I left behind. And the entrepreneurial itch. I had a bunch of students who wanted to continue learning. I wanted to continue teaching. And so I set up a little bit of a rinky dink website where I recorded videos. I learned how to edit them. I would upload them and sold subscriptions. And so that was my first foray into like actually starting a business. And it's not like nothing really happened with it. It was a great business, learned a ton. I think we were minorly profitable, but it was a pretty small group. But yeah, it's been something I've always loved, and it's fun. I get to do it all the time now.
Yeah, and as you're talking, and well, you know what? I'll make a note of that about your major and everything because you
Hmm.
said you majored in supply chain, but that wasn't
Yeah.
wasn't the first major, and that's common. So we'll talk about
Mhm.
that when we get to the college years. So
Yeah.
let's talk about, I mean, I personally think the way dad and I handled everything was just perfect, right? But, and I'm kidding. I'm kidding, of course. But let's talk about that experience. So we, from the parent standpoint, I saw it as, we had it teed up and your dad was handling the essays and kind of the application part, and I
Mhm.
handled the financial part. That's kind of how we divided and conquered. And that was, our skill sets matched that. And then, I don't totally remember this exact occasion or occasions when we did this, but we
Mhm.
did sit down and have, one of my colleagues, one of our experts on the team calls it the college money talk, with your kids.
Mhm.
And we did sit down and talk to you and Shannon about that. Do you have a
Mhm.
recollection of that? Or what were your thoughts about we could talk about the financial piece and how that was
Mhm.
laid out and teed up to you as as a high school kid. Were you clear around that? Was that valuable to you? Just what
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I remember, I mean, obviously, I mean, you and dad were like crazy helpful. I think the funny thing as a high school kid is like we talked about college all the time. From middle school growing up, right? It's a common topic of conversation. And when you're little, you don't like you go to college and you study something and you get a job. But like past what you hear from other people, you don't like it's until you get older, it's hard to wrap your head around what that actually means. And I think I was fortunate enough where like you were thinking about the financials in a way that a lot of my friends' parents, either A, it wasn't an issue, so it was never a topic, or B, they never talked about it. And then later they're like, oh my gosh, I have like $80,000 in debt and now I have a job that where I make 50K a year. What am I going to do about this?
right.
So we were having that conversation in advance, which I was a little more, I knew I want to study business. I was always thinking about that anyway. So it wasn't a huge jump for me mentally to start thinking in that way. But I do remember we had conversations around what I wanted to study, which I was fortunate enough, it was always with the lens of business. And then we did talk briefly about what we wanted our college experience to be. I mean, you and dad went to Cornell and had an experience that, like, I think Shannon and I both really liked the idea of. And we had explicit conversations at times like, hey, what kind of things do you want in your university experience? Which I have a few things that now having gone, I would look back on and think about like characteristics of college, of certain colleges you cannot change. Like, actually, my grandma, your mom, at one point when I was evaluating between a few options, IU being one of the big ones, she said, you can make a big school small, but you can't make a small school big. It was one of those examples of like, when you're at IU, you can find your group. Sure, it's 40,000 students. Like, you can find your group and you can find people you spend time with. But if you're at a college with 2,000 students, that's the cap. That's all there is, right? And so I think there's a lot of things like that where you can go to a school and it just is what it is sometimes. And I didn't like we talked about it, but the way my brain works, I think I would have been like more explicitly like, okay, what are the things that I really would like? What are the things I don't know that I would like? And what are the things I'm not interested in? And that activity alone is a little eye opening to say, like, what falls into the right buckets there. I was lucky enough where, with your guys' help, like, IU was perfect. It was great. Like, I absolutely loved it. And, but, anyways, yeah, we talked a lot about that kind of stuff. I think the financial side, the big thing you pressed on that I think when I was younger, I was like, we get it. I know. But now is really important was just at the end of the day, like, out of college, you should get a good job. If you don't, like, I would make the argument, like, there are other reasons to go, but I think that's a really important reason to go. And so every school we went to, you always asked, like, hey, what are the placement rates outside of school? And that was a metric that, eventually when I have kids, I'm going to say and ask the same thing. But one thing I wish I asked in those conversations was like, when they get placed, where do they get placed and what kind of jobs are they? Because even thinking about schools for business, IU places a lot of consultants, some investment bankers. They don't really place anybody at big tech or startups. It's in Bloomington, Indiana, right? Like it's not really the place for it. But if you're at Stanford or you're at UC Berkeley, that's a different split, right? Probably half the class isn't going to startups, right? But it is different. So, anyways, and the last thing you mentioned is the financial side. I do remember us talking about it. I don't remember the explicit thing we exactly discussed, but it was very apparent that like college is not just a party. There is a cost associated with it. I was fortunate enough that you guys planned ahead. Like, yeah, it was just in a fortunate, lucky spot. But there was like things cost money. And like at the end of the day, it has to come from somewhere. And one of those forms can be loans. And like, what does that actually mean? And most of my friends who took on loans, I think were like, whatever, like it's a loan, I'll pay it back later. But like you can very quantifiably say an 80K loan or whatever number means I have to pay the following every month for this many years. And if you're like, well, how much would I make a year on an entry level salary? You can do the math and say, oh, that's ridiculous. Or it's also okay, you know?
You're
So
doing
anyways,
it, you're thinking about it, and that's actually
yeah.
not to promote our software, but we do that. Like
Subtle
we
plug.
say, hey, out of IU, business management, this is the average first year salary. Hey, if
Mhm.
that's your funding gap, if you will, and it's all loans over 10 years, assumed interest rate, it looks like this versus over 25 years. And we do that so that the student, the kids see it, but so do the parents, because it is an emotional process, right? And you get emotionally tied to schools, and it could be, you know, my grandfather went there, I work with families, and it is emotional. Like all my
Mhm.
family went here, and I got to go here come hell or high water, and doesn't matter what it costs. So those kind of things come up. Yeah, because I was hoping, and I'll bring up that story in a little bit, where we really
Mhm.
did have okay, we've got two
Yeah.
options here, and how does that look? And I share that story a lot, but I'll share it before we break on this piece.
Mhm.
So yeah, so we sat down and we had that conversation, which I'm always sharing with parents. Like you got to do it. And the parents should be on the same page, or if they're not, have their discussion before you're sitting down with the kids. So it's not
Yeah.
like a bit of an argument slash
I,
disagreement in front of the kids.
I mean, I think to your point, it's like everyone's on the same team. So like one thing that you guys did that I really appreciated was you treated us more like peers than the idea. I do know some friends whose parents were like, "You got 10,000 a year. Let's not talk about it anymore." And it's like, okay, like you could have the conversation of like, "This is what we have. This is what I'm thinking about. If I were you, I would think about the following things. This is what I care about." Like if you were on the same level, how would you talk about it? Like one thing looking back that we never explicitly said, but looking back feels so obvious, but my high schooler brain didn't distill it, was this idea of the SAT. If you got a higher score, you got more money generally. Generally, not for everywhere,
At
but
some
generally
schools that give
at some
money for
schools.
that, but
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not so broad strokes. But like looking back, an interesting takeaway would have been, hey, for every additional 100, 200, 500 points, you will likely at a set of schools get 10,000 more dollars. That to my brain even then would have been like, what are you, a dummy? Spend 20 more hours studying, because literally 20 hours could be, I'm making up numbers obviously, $10,000 over the course of 4 years. But like that is the kind of thing where I think some parents say, hey, you should be studying for the SAT. Why aren't you studying for the SAT? Whereas you could say, hey, just so you know, if you study and you can do the following, you will literally save $20,000.
Yeah, and I'll own some of that, because I don't know that I was that explicit. And I think that when you got that prestige scholarship from IU, what was it, 4,000 a year? And then I
Oh my God.
realized literally if you got 60 or 70 more points on your SAT, it would have been 9,000 a year. So that
That's
was
exactly what I'm talking about.
20 that and me
Yeah.
as a professional, I was like, oh
Mhm.
my gosh, I missed that, right? And that's where, to your point, kids might see it like, okay, that's going to save us a lot of money. And then it makes it, maybe you would have studied a little harder with that tutor that I paid
I mean,
for.
honestly, I mean, no, jokes aside, like seriously.
I'm not
But like,
joking, because you guys did
I,
not try very hard.
I mean, it's a fair point though, because I like if I, high school brain is kind of it's a weird brain, right? You have weird prioritizations that you do in your head. But like it's very easy to say, hey, why should I study? Because if I can do the following thing, it will be worth tens of thousands of dollars, especially when you're making, I think my job at that point, I was making like $12 an hour and I was so excited. It was like you could just do that math and it's like, okay, yeah, I'd be a total dummy not to do this. So, anyways, yeah, stuff like that. I think like being direct and transparent is just like, listen, the world work because this is how the world works, right? Like, there's no, it just, yeah, there's no coddling or anything, right? So, anyways, that's something I think people should do, and yeah, and then you could hopefully, save money in the process.
Yeah, yeah. So what, when you think back, I mean, a lot's changed because
Mhm.
you graduated in 2016, but do you remember having any challenges building the list, researching schools? I do remember we had the big Fisk book, and the
Yeah.
internet existed. It's not like you're not that old where barely anybody was online. I mean, you could go online and
Yeah. I think I remember the feeling I felt, and Shannon I know felt it too, which was like pure overwhelm. Like we were just super overwhelmed. And it is a big question to be like, hey, I think I applied to 10 schools, which was a lot. Like, hey, pick 10 schools. One of these is going to be the place you're at for 4 years, hopefully. And it's going to dictate the rest of your life. So, anyways, go read some stuff. That's like a big thing to consider and think
think we
about.
eat it up like that
No,
though,
no,
because that's
you
easy,
you didn't. You
yeah.
didn't.
But
But in my
that's
own
how
head,
you thought of it. Yeah.
yeah, which is fairly accurate, actually, in my opinion. So I think there was a lot. It's just a lot of options. I think with AI I mean, we use the internet, but now there's even more content online. Like that can help a ton. But if there are, thousands of options, figuring out how to say, okay, if there are thousands, ideally I get to a pool of like 100 that could fit things that I like. Then with 100, you can actually think, okay, I can think about each of these somewhat individually and pick a top 10. I don't think our process was good. I don't think it was that strategic or whatever,
No,
but it
yeah.
resulted in like I was very happy with everywhere I applied. I got into a handful of places. Obviously, I super happy with the selection. Yeah, the part that I was thinking about for this question was I wish we had the explicit conversation of based on what I knew at the time as a high school student, what did I want and definitely not want out of a college? I knew I wanted to go to a big school. Wasn't really interested in the small school thing purely because I wanted to do a lot. I wanted there to be a ton of people. I wanted to go to a school where like there was a lot of people were doing a lot of things. There was like sports. I wanted Greek life. So like that was a factor too that I thought about. There's some other things too that like what I wanted to study, like how good was the business program? That was another really big factor. And I also wanted to leave Washington State. Like I didn't want to go to a school where most of my high school went. Like I wanted to be kind of new and like a completely new experience. And so that helped filter down the list in a pretty significant way. But I don't feel like people talk about that stuff. Instead, they go, well, I live in Seattle. I got to apply to UW. And it's like, no, you don't. Like, it's up to you. Like, you said you don't want a city school. UW's in the middle of Seattle. So, like, why are you even applying? For such a big decision, it feels like people don't put a lot of thought. I mean, you're in this world. I am not. But, like, back from what I remember, people just kind of applied, which was always surprising to me when, like, you should think, hey, if you want Greek life, prioritize schools that have Greek life. You don't need to do it, but as an option, it's great to have. And there's a bunch of other variables you can
Yeah, and
think
some
about too.
people will be the flip side. Like they want to
Yeah,
stay, whatever. They love the Pacific Northwest. They love the Chicago area. There's a lot of
totally.
schools to look at. I mean, more as you go east. I mean, where I grew
Mhm.
up, you throw a rock and you hit three schools. In Washington, it's a little bit more
Yeah.
spread out. Although in Seattle, there were a bunch of private schools in that area and stuff. So it's
Yeah.
really all what you want. You wanted a big school. Some kids, they went to small school. They want a small liberal arts experience. And then like what you're saying, one of the things is how far away do you want to be? And you look at all those things in a strategic way. And yeah, it does help cut down on the overwhelm. And what you said about figure out your home for 4 years, it's going to dictate your life. I'm sure a lot of kids feel that way. And that's why I said, we didn't say that. I hope you didn't feel, because I
No,
didn't
you
want you
didn't
to
say
feel that
that.
way as a parent.
Yeah,
But it brings up a good point, the kids, society, their classmates, the teachers, the school district,
totally.
yada yada. There's there's expectations, there's pressures that might come directly from the parents. I mean, I've seen that a lot, but a lot of times no, and the parents are countering it but it's still there. And,
Hmm.
even adults don't like to be vulnerable and share their feelings. And so kids, maybe even less so, or high school kids, not kids. So that's a takeaway is, it matters where you go to college. To me, it's where you're going to thrive. And that's why I knew you would thrive at IU. I knew Shannon would thrive at JMU. I just knew it because I knew you. I knew IU very well from being there. JMU, not so much, but visiting and just
Hmm.
everything with Shannon. That's what really matters is where you're going to thrive, not where your friends go, not what the rankings say. And the placement office and all that, absolutely, that matters. Like that should be a stop on your tour is, how are these kids getting jobs? And to your point, what kind of jobs are they getting 6 months out? Not they're flipping burgers in their hometown because they can't find anything. That's employed, but that's not what you really want. And if a college doesn't have that dialed in really well, it's a data point, right? It's a data point. Yeah, that's, you're going to college to grow up and to have fun. I always
Hmm.
said I played hard and I worked hard in college, and I did, and I had to, or else I would have flunked out. But I had a good time, but you're ultimately there to figure out what your next step is and how you're going to go out and impact the world at least right away. And then look at you and morphed from Boeing to just starting two different companies, morphed, people listening are like, yep, I could think of how I morphed all the way up. So
Totally.
it's not a static thing that you come out and do it forever. I mean, that's what my parents did was more you do
Hmm.
this forever. It's just a different world now, good and bad. I mean, it makes it a little bit more stressful but more exciting. So yeah, I think
Hmm.
that's a great point, and thanks for sharing that that you can feel that, and oh, this is like the biggest decision in my whole life, and it's a decision,
I
and
mean,
it
arguably up to that point in your life, it kind of is the biggest decision.
yeah,
It doesn't change the fact that yeah, it's a big choice, like a lot of pressure, like, but you still like places where you can remove like the emotions from it and try to say, hey, I want Greek life. Okay, great. It's not an opinion question. We should just say, hey, all the schools I'm interested in, do they have Greek life? If they don't, I can still apply there, but I should
yeah,
at least know it, right?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
like just knowing the reason why instead of most people are just like UW because
And I
gotta
would
go to
say
UW.
if some of our listeners are like, oh, my child really isn't sure, go on campuses. Like start going on campuses even early. Like freshman year, you're on vacation and they're freshmen in high school. Just take them on a random campus. Don't do a tour and all that, but just start exposing your kids. And that's not what my parents did. The only school I ever knew my whole life was Notre Dame. I grew up,
Mhm.
I was in South Bend, everything was Notre Dame. And so when I went to campuses, I was like, this isn't like Notre Dame. I don't know if I like this. It was the opposite of what you're supposed to do, right? That my frame of reference was Notre Dame, and I didn't go to Notre Dame and I figured it out, but it's good to just expose your kids, and they're kids. You don't really know. I mean, I think of myself as pretty immature when I was looking at campuses. I was this school I was gonna go to. My deal was, oh, they have a freshman dorm on a lake, and they have a lot of bars. Like that was how I thought about it. I was 17 years old and just a
But
typical high school kid. So
I don't think that's that uncommon,
yeah, it's
even
probably
now.
not. It's probably, I'm sure
Yeah.
my dad, when I mentioned it, was like, okay, that's some great analysis. Thank you for that. But all right, so let's wrap up this piece and let's talk about you did, and I think schools are still doing this. I think they called it a fly out. So
Mm.
you flew out to a school in Pennsylvania. It was like a diversity weekend, and I think they flew you and Shannon and one of your other because it was Seattle, and they don't necessarily
Yep.
get that many kids applying from Seattle, and you had been admitted. So
Mhm.
you went there, had a great weekend. I mean, that's why the colleges do this and pay for it,
Yep.
right? And then you're like, I want to go here, right? And so
Mhm.
this is what I want to end with, and this is what I share on webinars when I walk my talk here is this. I sat down with you, remember, and you said, I want to go to this school. I have XYZ friends already. I knew that
Mhm.
that school wouldn't be a good fit for you. It was too small, but I didn't say any of that. And the business school wasn't the greatest fit for you, but I didn't say any of that as your mom. But I just said, look, we've got this 4-year cash flow. That school is $70,000 more. When I did the math,
Mm.
And we've talked about our buckets, and that's just not affordable. I didn't give the option of, well, if you want to take out tons of loans for that, and I'd be signing most of them. I didn't give that option. And what was your response when I did that? Do you
I mean,
remember?
I think yeah, I remember sitting down and I explicitly remember the conversation of we came back and I was really excited about the school. And like realistically, just because I had a great time, I already had friends. I could kind of see myself there, which is why they obviously do it. So good job to them. But we sat down and yeah, I mean, we kind of talked as peers. You were like, listen, this is the scenario. And we both, I think you, dad, and I, we were talking about it. And the natural outcome was like, yeah, all that being said, like it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a how could you or like it was just like hey we're all on the same page but like these are just the facts like they're just facts you can't argue about the facts so if you want to do something like this these are the things that will happen. I don't believe that's a great idea, and I was like yeah I don't believe that's a great idea either, and there's
Yeah.
other options that I think will also be great, and so we just moved on, and I think
Yeah.
IU is
And it
top of
was
the list anyway.
And I think a lot of the reason it worked is just, those expectations had been set and you knew that financial was part of this discussion the whole time. And so that's like,
Mhm.
it works. It works. And I tell audiences all the time, it really does. So encourage you to do that, our listeners, because
Eh,
it helps with, I had one mom say my kids crying and called me a dream crusher. And, kind of wanted to laugh a little, but it wasn't funny. It was like serious. And she was really upset. And like, that can be maybe not the disappointment can't be completely avoided, but it can be a bunch of it can be mitigated if you understand what you can afford. And then you're teaching your kids to make prudent financial decisions, which in my mind is worth
yeah.
billions of dollars for kids to know and have that ingrained in them.
Yeah, I just know people, you know, now even who are like, I loved college. It was great, but like, I still have debt. And it's like, it's not like people always say, like, college, best 4 years of your life, whatever. And like, yeah, I had an amazing 4 years. But even going into school, I'm like, I don't want that to be true. I don't want it to be the best 4 years of my life because then what happens after? Like, the rest of life is very long. And so I do know a lot of people who either A, hustled for years, spent no money, went on no vacations, didn't go to bachelor parties, didn't go to friends' weddings because they're like, I have to allocate all this money to paying back my student loans. And that's a committing for years
Yeah, it's an
and
opportunity cost, big time.
big time. And so it's to the people who, who the kids are really upset or whatever, like, the high school brain is a bit of a high school brain, like they, maybe not completely mature yet, but also like having those conversations and just being transparent about what that ends up being later is like there's a real cost,
Yeah.
further down
Yeah.
the line.
And that's a good point. I never, parents can take that away. It's like it isn't just, oh, I have loans, but it's like then you have to make decisions not to do things you want to do later in life because you just can't afford it. So, but
Mhm.
all right, so
Yeah.
let's shift now. So you're at IU, and
Mhm.
let's talk briefly about this. So I'm just gonna call out on myself that, big advice that we gave because we went to a private school and everybody was in the same boat, right? Nobody knew anybody. They all showed up. And that's always the crazy part of it, right? Is wow, I'm going away from home. Everything's new. I don't know anybody. And, when you guys brought it up, which is normal, we're like, don't worry, everybody's in the same boat. And both of you went to state schools out of state. And that was totally our bad that we get these phone calls, Mom, everybody is running around with their friends because they're high school. When you think about it, it's logical. You go to University of Washington, where we used to live. You go to Western Washington. You go to Wazoo, Washington State in Eastern Washington. I mean, they even have dorms that are like, well, that's this high school dorm. Not bad. It's just a lot of kids go to those schools from the state of Washington. So when you're starting something new and you're nervous, of course you're going to gravitate to people you know, even if they weren't your best friends in high school. So just talk about that a little bit. If we might have some listeners who, their kids they grew up in Iowa and they're thinking about going to wherever, right?
Mhm.
University of Washington or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the Yeah, so the story there was Indiana public school. A lot of folks who are local, who live in Indiana, go there. A lot of folks in the Midwest, like Chicago, and a fair amount of East Coast New York people too. And so I didn't know anyone who was going to IU, especially coming from Seattle. But yeah, we had talked to her like, "Hey, don't worry, everybody's in the same boat." And I'm like, I'm pretty friendly, so I wasn't that worried about meeting people. But the first night, I did random roommate, a guy named Joe from Chicago, still a friend. And so I showed up on whatever day it was. And Joe was supposed to be there that day, wasn't able to make it. Like he wasn't able to make it till the following evening. So I was there in the room by myself and I'm like, all right, like, I'm in a dorm. There's all these people, like maybe meet some folks. And as I was walking by all the doors, I like pretty quickly realized everyone was just hanging out with all the people they already knew from high school, like completely apparent, like almost immediately. And yeah, I kind of realized I was like, oh, yeah, that does, like, it does make sense. People naturally, new place, everybody's excited, just go to the people they know. So yeah, that first night was a bit of a bummer, but the experience I wanted was being somewhere totally different. And although it was a bit more of an immediate punch in the gut temporarily, what it meant was I just like really tried to go out of my way to like go to a lot of activities or kind of club fairs, like a bunch of different things that I don't think those other folks went to. And I met a lot more people because of it over the course of 4 years. But yeah, definitely the initial like, oh man, people aren't in the exact same situation as me made it a little more challenging. And Indiana loved it, but they didn't have a great like freshman welcome week or process. Like JMU had a great thing. They all did activities. They were merging dorms, did stuff with other dorms. There was none of that in Indiana. It was like the RA would talk to you for 30 minutes and would leave. You'd probably never talk to him again. And then he's like, all right, like have a good week. And that was it.
Yeah, it
So
was
it all worked
as a
out.
parent seeing both. And I remember calling Shannon and saying, don't mention to your brother how many friends you've made because his situation's a little different. Yeah, because
Yeah.
shout out JMU's James Madison University of Virginia. I mean, their orientation was phenomenal. And they had
Mhm.
to move and move and move in to the point that it was time for us to leave and we weren't even done. And they were like, oh, she's got to go. And they'd have them up till 2 a.m. And you're so tired and you don't have time to get homesick, and they had him going and
Mhm.
going for 4 days. So your situation, hers, even though she was at a state school, a lot of Virginia, even like where I grew up,
Yeah.
tons of Jersey kids went to JMU. I think it was a little different because the university had that set up, and that's something. It's just all the schools are different. You figured it out. It was just like
Mhm.
you said. I think that's a great way to describe it. I think every kid, I still remember when I went to college, it's punch in the gut. Like it's, unless you're like going right near home and you can go home all the time, which some kids do, and that's their choice. It's like it's a growing up step and you can't run home. I was homesick till like November 1st and then poof, it was gone, right? It's just
Mhm.
everybody's different. My roommate wasn't homesick at all, and then she started having it more when it was passing for me. Everybody's different, but that is a takeaway that, state schools. Another thing that state schools tend to do orientations for freshmen during the summer. You remember you went with dad, you flew with dad
Yeah.
in June, which was probably a godsend because then you knew a few people, and I think those are the
Yeah.
people you texted at the beginning so you could
Yeah.
actually have a friend to talk to and everybody else is piling around instead of, I mean, that's the worst. You're brand new to college and you're just sitting like a loser in your dorm room and everybody else is talking to whoever and you
Yeah.
don't know anybody. And it's hard to walk into a room of five people that are yucking it up and know each other.
Yeah.
So
Which
that was
I would
kind of a
say,
learning thing for us.
yeah, I would say the funny thing is like, sure, all of that happened, but like within a month or two,
It
I
didn't
was
matter.
plenty like, yeah, it didn't matter at all, right?
Yeah.
There were so many things going on. It was great. I mean, that's one of the positives of a big school. There are things happening constantly everywhere all the time. But yeah, it was a funny start,
Yeah,
but
well,
it
and I
all
think it's
worked
just
out
a
great.
fun thing to talk about on the podcast because it never dawned on Dad and I. And then we were like, oh, crap, we messed up on that one because we told him everybody. And then, it was just a different environment that we went to school in and you guys had a different deal. Yeah, I had this question about, what would you tell high school kids to focus on when they're building a list? But I think, I mean, you can talk
Mm.
about that, but I think you've touched on that, already in our conversation.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think yeah, like college, I mean, 4 years, maybe five if you stay a little longer. But like
Hopefully
that's a
not.
long time. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a long time, right? So it is one of the first and early time in your life I think for a lot of people, where you're like, I mean, you are totally on your own. And like, 4 years is a long time. You go through ups and downs, and like that's kind of part of the experience. Like if everything is just all, roses all the time and you kind of, I don't know, this is my hot take, I guess. If you have a comfort area you can just run home to, whether it's home or something else, like I don't think that's really great from a growth standpoint. Like real growth happens when you're like legitimately like don't feel great, but it's good. Stinks for a moment, great in the long term. And so yeah, I think like putting yourself in scenarios like that is like net positive, especially when you're in college, right? Because like it's all about growth anyway.
Yeah. Do you have any, like, before we wrap up, if you were going to tell our listeners, parents and maybe some high school kids are listening, what are the key takeaways you would share, or something that you wish, as you keep talking, I like your high school brain, how you keep saying that, that you wish you would have thought of then, or just a key takeaway or two that you would want to leave with people based on your.
Yeah, I think this is, I mean, tell me if this isn't what what you're looking for. But the first thing that comes to mind is a little more about like college has a lot of purposes, but one is to like help you for what you want to do after, right? Most high school kids have no idea. Like I didn't know, like you shouldn't necessarily be certain, and it could probably change. But like I think it's a good practice, and we have some interns at our company right now, and we have this conversation about what do you want to do, and they're both like, I don't really know. And the next question I asked is like, well, what do you like if you have a Saturday where you have no plans and none of your friends can hang out, and you open up your computer, like what do you do? Where do you go? What do you read about? Like you don't need to read about anything, but you're doing something. What is it you're doing? And so it's like actually thinking, even when you're young, like what's the stuff I actually really like, and then what's the stuff I'm good at. And so taking those ideas, and then even when you're young, just thinking like, well, if you combine that stuff, like what are some of the things that people do? And the cool thing is when you're young, you can like shadow people, you can talk to people. Like I had one friend in, I forget if it was high school or college, who was dead set on being a doctor. And he got introduced to a doctor in the field he was interested in. And he talked to him, or he shadowed him. And he shadowed him for a day. And he was like, this job stinks. Like, I'm never outside. I'm always inside. All these people are angry and yelling at you. He's like, this would be my job for like 30 years. Like, I don't want to do that. And it's great because most people don't pick like an interest or a lane ever because they're like, what if it's wrong? And I'm like, that's perfect. You should like strive to have the thing be proven wrong, because then it's just like you just need to find the thing. Once you find the thing, it's great. And the metaphor I used with the interns was like, if I dropped you off in the middle of the ocean and said, hey, you can't see anything around you, but you need to get to land, and you just decided to wade in the water in the same spot, that would be a really bad situation. There's no good outcome. But if you start swimming in a direction, yeah, maybe shore isn't that way, but it's better than just staying there. You should try to do something. And tying this all to college is if you start to learn what you do and don't like, that should influence how you think about this, right? And if you really, really don't know, going to a bigger school that has a bunch of good stuff is something you should consider. I had plenty of friends who thought they wanted to do medicine and went to a school because they had a great pre-med. And then they're like, turns out I hate biology. And it's like,
Like your
oh,
dad. Your dad was
yeah.
pre-med for a
I
hot
mean,
minute.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah.
anyways, maybe not exactly what you were asking, but I think having like juniors and seniors or even sophomores in high school, just like be like, hey, take a little ownership and be like, hey, I want you to think about this. And like, we can try to introduce you to people who do this stuff. Like
Yeah.
we're in a world where you can really learn like what those jobs actually consist of, and then try to think about school with that filter. I think it would, yeah, I think a lot of people would benefit from it.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I know for younger people, it seems weird, like, I'm going to talk to somebody I don't know, but it's hugely valuable. And most people I've found, if you want to ask for advice or their thoughts or shadow them, like most people are like, yeah, this is great. And I do think
Mhm.
that's a great story about the falling around a doctor. I found kids too that like, I want to be this. And then when I show them the curriculum they have to study, it's like, that's what I have to do. Like I thought it was going to
Yeah.
be like the CSI TV show doing this and that. It's like, no, you got to study all this so that you can like you never should base it on TV, first of all.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
an
yeah.
entertainment form, right?
But
But Yeah, that's a great point that, and try not to put so much weight on it, but yeah, just sitting back and thinking about what you're good at is a thing, but then what do you like to do? And I love how you say you have free time. What do you do? And if you're constantly doing this kind of stuff with your free time, that tells you something about yourself. And I know there's whole companies that work with young adults, even older adults and kids around the
Mm.
college piece. But then there's young adults that they don't know, and they're done with college and they still don't know. And when you get older and older, that gets harder and harder, because then you might have expenses and responsibilities and you're married and kids.
Yeah.
And so it's a valuable thing to start thinking about and looking at as a young person. And don't judge yourself, just think about it and just go, you know what? I really love doing this. And if that's not the superest coolest thing at the moment to be doing, who cares? But start thinking about that and what that means, what kind of jobs. And then, of course, you have to think about AI and if your job will be replaced. There's a lot going on now around that. That's a whole nother
Yeah.
conversation. But
Yeah, I just, it's more of like at the end of the day, nobody remembers the things that don't go well. Nobody does. Everybody remembers the things that go well. So like if you, let's say you love YouTube and you want to be a content creator. If you make 5 YouTube videos and realize I hate it, I don't know how to break it to you. No one's going to watch them anyway. So who cares? Like it doesn't matter. But if you never do the thing, you never know. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people sometimes get stuck in that zone. Or if it's investment banking, I had plenty of friends who were like, my dad did banking. I'm going to do banking. And they graduated. They're like, this is a slog. I'm like, well, I could have told you that. I know a guy who does it. Like people just like try to take some ownership and like think about what it could be instead of pushing it, kicking
yeah,
the can
use
down the
those high
road.
school years to kind of investigate.
Oh,
It's a
yeah.
great opportunity to do
The
that.
last thing I'll say is when you're young, you have this great, since you don't know anything, it's actually awesome because everyone was in your spot. They were young and in high school and also didn't know anything. So instead of saying, I'm reaching out to you because I can bring X, Y, or Z skill set, you're saying, hey, I'm young. I think what you do is amazing. I would love to learn about what you do and get your advice. Could I talk to you for 30 minutes? People love taking those conversations, and you're just young and you don't know anything. And that's actually a really big positive. Because when you're older, you can't really say that because you should probably know some stuff, right? When you're younger, it's totally okay. And you should use that to your advantage.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's a great point. I think it's a great way to end our conversation. Thank you, thank you, thank you for coming on.
Of
I
course.
knew it would be a good combo, and I think it's helpful for younger parents that are dealing with their Brennans and their family, right? To kind of, hopefully you glean some gems off of this that can help you in your family dynamic and your kids that are in those high school years, and just enjoy it, because I'm telling you, it whips by. And I
Mm.
still remember the exact time waving goodbye to you. We went to the Waffle House and said goodbye. And Shannon's, it's just, and it gets me a little choked up when I even talk about it this many years. So, try and enjoy the time with your kids. And a lot of the things we're talking about today and planning, it's kind of, ew, I have to plan, but it helps smooth all this out. It really does. And then you can have, it's always challenging with high school kids, especially when they're about to leave, because they know everything and there's all those fun things that go on, but it helps. So again, thanks for being here, Bren.
Yeah,
And
thanks for having me.
yeah, and everybody, we will have I'll be back with my buddy Matt next week. We'll have another episode, so we will see you next time. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you heard, please follow us, share the show, and maybe even send it to a parent or a counselor who would enjoy it. I'm your host, Peg Keough, and I was joined by my special guest, my son, Brennan Keough. This episode was produced by the wonderful Eileen Campbell. We'll see you back here next week with Matt Carpenter and me as your usual hosts.